Pecos, Texas, July 5, 1966. By late afternoon, a teenage girl is pulled from the swimming pool at the Ropers Motel. She is unresponsive. A motel employee and a guest attempt to revive her. Among them is a 15-year-old girl named Sandy Moore, the granddaughter of the motel's managers. The teenager is taken toward Reeves County Memorial Hospital. She will not survive. Only hours earlier, she had checked into a room here with a man. They had registered as husband and wife, under a name that would later prove to establish nothing about who he really was. He is still at the motel when she is found. According to Sandy Moore's later, on-record account, the man came to the office. He told her he needed the registration card to identify himself to police at the hospital. She handed it to him. He left. He never arrived at the hospital, and investigators never identified him. The county sheriff issued a regional alert describing him, but without a confirmed identity for the girl, and without the registration information that had left with the man, investigators were working with almost nothing. Her death, in 1966, was ruled an accidental drowning. Sandy Moore would carry that afternoon with her for the rest of her life. For more than 50 years, the girl in the pool had no name at all. It would take a forensic DNA laboratory, a genealogist, and a family in Kansas who had been searching since 1966 to finally give her one back. Her name was Jolaine Hemmy. Her identity was eventually solved. The man who walked out of the Ropers Motel that afternoon, registration card in hand, was not. Before Pecos, before the motel, before she became an unidentified girl buried hundreds of miles from home, there was Kansas. Jolaine Hemmy was born on August 11, 1948, in Salina, Kansas, the ninth of 15 children born to Richard and Elverda Hemmy. The family lived on a farm outside town, raising wheat alongside cattle, hogs, and turkeys. They were Catholic, and the household ran on the scale and rhythm that 15 children and a working farm demanded. In May of 1966, Jolaine graduated from Salina High School. What survives of her, in the record, is not a portrait of a personality, but a set of facts about a life just beginning to take its own shape. After graduation, Jolaine moved from the Salina area to Kansas City, Kansas, dividing her time between the homes of two of her sisters. She took work at Dale's Drive-In during the week and at the New Way Drive-In on weekends. According to the family's later account, Jolaine had met an older man through her work. The record offers no name, no face, no detail about who he was, only that the family understood him to be part of her life that summer. Whether this was the same man later seen with her in Texas has never been established. On Friday, July 1, 1966, Jolaine's sister Joyce invited her to go see a movie that evening. Jolaine declined. After that, she did not return. There is no confirmed account of where she went instead, or who she may have been with. The absence of those answers is not a gap this documentary can fill. It is part of the story. Jolaine had worked at both Dale's Drive-In and the New Way. In the period after she disappeared, she did not collect the wages owed to her from either job. For her sisters, this detail carried weight. It deepened their concern, and it complicated the simplest explanation: that she had merely left and moved on with her life somewhere else. It did not prove that a crime had occurred, but money owed and never claimed was significant. Jolaine's sisters went to the police. According to the most detailed account of what followed, reported decades later by Texas Monthly, they were told that Jolaine had probably left with her boyfriend, and that she would likely come home on her own. No formal missing person record from that period has ever been located. It would be inaccurate to say the police refused to look into it, and inaccurate to say a formal investigation was opened and pursued. What can be said is narrower. A family voiced their concern, and were given an explanation that assumed her absence was a choice. In 1966, there was no national system capable of matching a missing teenager in Kansas to an unidentified young woman found more than 800 miles away in Texas. A concerned family in one state and a distant sheriff's office in another had no way of knowing they might one day be searching for the same person. That gap was quiet and unremarkable at the time, It would remain in place for decades. At some point after Jolaine's disappearance, a piece of mail reached her family. On July 3rd, a postcard addressed to Joyce was postmarked in Las Vegas. For a family that had spent days without knowing where their daughter and sister had gone, the postmark offered something they had not had before: a place, a date, the possibility that she was still out there, still alive. Whether it told the truth would remain unresolved for decades. The postcard carried a printed image of the pool at the Flamingo Hotel. It was addressed to Jolaine's sister, Joyce. It was signed Joe. Around the same time, a similar letter reached Jolaine's mother, Alverda. According to Joyce Hemmy's later account, the family did not believe the handwriting was Jolaine's. They also said she was not known to them as Joe. Who actually wrote the card, or the letter, was never established. The postmark proved only where the mail entered the postal system, not who wrote it, or who was standing in that city when it was sent. Nevada's marriage records for 1966 were checked, in case Jolaine had married there. No match was found. It was one possible explanation, tested and left unconfirmed. Not proof she was never in Las Vegas, simply a question that produced no answer. What is known is this: on July 1st, 1966, Jolaine disappeared from Kansas City, Kansas. On July 3rd, a postcard bearing a Las Vegas postmark reached her family. On July 5th, she was in Pecos, Texas. 3 points, 4 days, no confirmed route between them. Kansas City and Pecos are the only 2 points directly tied to Jolaine's known presence. Las Vegas exists in the record only as a postmark, a place the mail passed through, not a place she is confirmed to have been. Pecos was hosting a rodeo around the time the pair arrived, and some who have looked into the case since have wondered whether that was part of what brought them there. No confirmed connection has ever been established, and no matching name turned up in the era's rodeo records. It remains, at most, a coincidence of timing. On the afternoon of July 5, 1966, Jolaine arrived at the Ropers Motel in Pecos, Texas. She was not alone. A man was with her. At the front desk, they presented themselves as husband and wife. Who he was has never been established. Whether he was the same man Jolaine had known in Kansas City has never been confirmed. This is the same afternoon, the same motel, the same room that opened this film. The girl in the pool has a name now. The man beside her at the front desk still does not. At check-in, the two of them signed an assumed name, Russell Batuon. In the most detailed account of the case, other sources render the surname Batoon. The exact spelling has never been settled, because the card itself did not survive to be checked against. When investigators looked into the name, they found a real Russell Batuon, a United States Marine stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, with no connection to Pecos or to the young woman who drowned there. He was ruled out. Whatever its origin, the name on the registration card has never been confirmed as his own. Beyond the name, what is known about the man is limited, and some of it does not agree. One detailed account describes him as roughly a decade older than Jolaine. A separate police estimate placed him closer to 25. He is described, consistently, as blonde and slender. His vehicle is less certain. One witness recalled a dark-colored sedan. Police, working from a different account, thought it might have been a Mercury. Neither was ever confirmed. That's the outer edge of what a handful of people, decades later, could still recall about a man they saw only briefly. Roughly 3 hours passed between check-in and what happened next. During that window, the man is reported to have been in the room, apparently resting. What passed between the two of them in that time is not recorded anywhere, and this film will not invent it. The record resumes at the pool. A motel maid found her in the water. Among those who responded was 15-year-old Sandy Moore, the granddaughter of the couple who managed the Ropers Motel. A guest staying at the motel joined her. Together, they pulled Jolaine from roughly 12 feet of water at the deep end and attempted to revive her. Sandy Moore would later describe that afternoon in her own words, decades on, to a reporter working on the case. Jolaine was taken to Reeves County Memorial Hospital and pronounced dead there. She was 17. Sandy Moore was 15. Neither of them had met before that afternoon. While the ambulance was still nearby, the man came to the motel office. According to Sandy Moore's later account, he asked her for the registration card, telling her he needed it to identify himself to police once he reached the hospital. She gave it to him. He left the motel. He never arrived at the hospital. What his intentions were cannot be known from the outside. He said he needed the card for identification. Whether that was true or what changed for him afterward is not something this documentary can answer, and no available source answers it either. What can be said plainly is this: the card left with him and was never recovered. Sandy Moore has carried that afternoon with her for decades. The rescue attempt and the moment at the office that followed it. Reeves County Sheriff A.B. Nail circulated a description of the man across the region. Without a license plate, a confirmed vehicle, or a real name, there was almost nothing to work with. He was never located. In the room, a blouse, a bra, and a pair of shorts were left behind. An autopsy, performed by a pathologist in Odessa, documented a small abrasion, roughly the size of a quarter, above Jolaine's left cheekbone. Its origin was never determined. The cause of death was drowning. The manner of death was ruled accidental following the 1966 autopsy. Sheriff A.B. Nail did not open a homicide investigation. These are separate facts, and this film will not collapse them into one. A drowning does not, on its own, prove an accident. An accident ruling does not foreclose every question a family might still ask. What can be said is only what was found, and what was concluded in 1966, and that the original case file, along with the autopsy report itself, would later be reported lost. Years later, Pecos Police Chief Lisa Tarango would describe the death as suspicious, while saying there was no evidence proving it was a homicide. Separately, several of Jolaine's siblings have said they believe she was murdered. Both are true at the same time, an official finding and a family's private belief, and neither replaces the other here. By the time the investigation reached its limits, the man who had checked into the Ropers Motel that afternoon was gone, along with the only document that carried any trace of who he might have been. The young woman he had left behind had no name the county could confirm. No family had come forward. No missing person report from 800 miles away had ever crossed a Texas sheriff's desk. She would be buried in Pecos without her identity. What began, hours earlier, as two people signing an assumed name at a motel counter, ended with a girl who had no name at all. No family came forward, no record connected her to anyone, and so Pecos buried her as its own. The funeral director donated a casket, a local clothing store donated a dress. The headstone was paid for by public donation, and it read simply, "Unknown girl, drowned. July 5, 1966. She was laid to rest at Fairview Cemetery, across the street from the town's high school. There is no record of a large funeral, no account of speeches or public mourning on a grand scale. What is documented is smaller, and in some ways more telling. A community with no obligation to her chose not to let her be buried as simply a case number. It was not a resolution. It was a decision not to let the absence of a name mean the absence of care. Over the years that followed, the grave did not go untended. Flowers appeared at the site from time to time, left by community members with no personal connection to the young woman buried there. Later, officials with the Pecos Police Department were among those who visited. The headstone read, "Unknown girl." Locally, she was not unknown in the way a stranger passing through might assume. 800 miles away, in Kansas, a different kind of vigil was taking place. According to her son Paul, Jolaine's mother Elverda believed for roughly 30 years that her daughter might still be alive. At one point, the family hired a private detective. They could not sustain the cost, and the search, in that form, did not continue. Two forms of grief existed at the same time, for the same person, without either side knowing the other existed. In Pecos, a community tended a grave for a girl whose name they did not know. In Kansas, a family carried the absence of a daughter whose location they did not know. Neither reached the other. That changed in a small way in late 2014. An email was sent to Todd Matthews, then working with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, from someone using the name JCJ. The message pointed him toward old 1966 newspaper coverage of an unidentified young woman found in a Texas motel pool. Who sent it has never been established. Matthews looked into the coverage, and the case was entered into the Doe network and NamUs. The case now existed inside a modern, searchable system. That alone did not solve it. NamUs formally logged the case as UP 13480 on January 31, 2015, but there was no historical missing person record already in place to connect it to. Jolaine's sisters had gone to police in 1966. No formal record from that period has ever been located, and her family had no reason to know a case like this even existed. For the first time, half of the story had a modern home. The other half still did not know to look for it. In 2019, a NamUs regional reviewer named Mike Nance looked at the case again and concluded the unidentified woman may have been a minor. He referred the case to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. From there, the center's Ashley Rodriguez contacted Pecos Police Chief Lisa Tarango, who assigned Corporal Felix Salcido. For the first time in decades, the case was not simply being remembered, it was being actively worked. What they would find first was not a DNA match or a name. It was a file and 6 photographs, waiting to be looked at again. Tarango and Salcido began looking for whatever had survived from 1966. The original police case file and autopsy report were, by this point, reported lost. But through a retired funeral home employee named Pablo Carrasco, they recovered the original death certificate, burial expense records, condolence letters, and 6 Polaroid photographs taken in 1966 for identification purposes at the funeral home. This film will not describe their contents. What matters is that they had survived for more than 50 years and were about to be used for a purpose no one in 1966 had the tools to attempt. Using those photographs, a forensic artist with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a facial reconstruction, released publicly. It did not, on its own, produce her identification. It was one attempt to make an unnamed person recognizable, decades after the chance to recognize her in life had passed. On August 27, 2019, the grave at Fairview Cemetery was opened. Forensic anthropologist Mark Ingraham led the exhumation. Tarango, Salcido, and Carrasco were present. The original coffin had mostly disintegrated. The skeleton itself was reported to be in good condition. Scraps of pantyhose and a blue polka dot dress were recovered with the remains. None of this told investigators who she was. It told them there was still something here to work with. The remains were sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification in Denton, where a DNA profile was extracted and uploaded to CODIS, the national database used to compare DNA against existing criminal and missing person records. No match was found. That did not mean the process had failed. It meant no one matching her was already in that system. Another approach would be needed. In 2020, a case manager at Othram, a Texas laboratory specializing in forensic DNA work, came across the case through NCMEC's files. Skeletal material was sent there that August, where scientists performed full genome sequencing, a far more detailed genetic profile than a CODIS search allows. This kind of profile isn't built for a direct match against criminal records. It's built to trace genetic relationships, distant cousins, shared ancestry, the kind of connections genealogists can work outward and eventually inward toward a specific family. The resulting profile was uploaded to genealogy databases suited to that work. That November, the case was handed to genealogist Jennifer Moore at Innovative Forensic Investigations. This was research, not a single breakthrough moment. Identifying genetic relationships the DNA suggested, then building outward through family history, branch by branch. It eventually led to 3 siblings living in Texas, not suspects, but genealogical connections, whose place in a family tree pointed further north. The line led to Kansas, to the Hemmys. By this point, Jolaine's sister Joyce Hemmy was living in St. Petersburg, Florida. On Chief Tarango's behalf, a cold case detective there visited Joyce, seeking to confirm what the genealogy had begun to suggest. There is no detailed account of that conversation, and this film will not invent one. What can be said is this: after more than 50 years, an investigation that began with an unidentified girl in a West Texas motel pool had reached the front door of Jolaine's own sister. A genealogical lead is not confirmation. To test it, a Hemmy sibling provided a DNA sample, compared by a lab called Gene by Gene against the profile Othram had developed from the remains in Pecos. The comparison confirmed it. The unidentified young woman buried in Texas was a member of the Hemmy family. Tarango and Salcedo traveled to Salina, Kansas, to deliver the news in person. Roughly 15 members of Jolaine's family were told, together, what the investigation had found. On January 19, 2021, the identification was made public. The young woman buried in Pecos, Texas, for more than 50 years under a headstone that read only "Unknown Girl" was Jolaine Hemmy, the 17-year-old who had disappeared from Kansas City in the first days of July 1966. Her name had been recovered. What happened to her had not. On April 9, 2022, Jolaine came home. Her remains, cremated by a mortuary in Odessa, were brought back to Kansas. At a graveside service at All Saints Catholic Cemetery in Salina, her family laid her to rest beside her mother and father. For 55 years, she had been buried under a stone that carried no name, in a town none of her family had ever visited. Now she was home, beside her parents, under her own. By any reasonable measure, this is an ending. A family that spent decades not knowing where their sister had gone, finally knew. A community that had cared for an unnamed grave for 2 generations, finally learned who they had been remembering. It is also not the whole story. The man who checked into the Ropers Motel with Jolaine that afternoon has never been identified. The name on the registration card has never been confirmed as his own, and the card itself was never recovered. Why Jolaine traveled from Kansas City to Pecos, and by what route, has never been established. The 4 days between her disappearance and her arrival at that motel remain unaccounted for. The postcard postmarked from Las Vegas and the letter that reached her mother have never been confirmed as her own writing. Whether the man Jolaine had known in Kansas City was the same man who stood beside her at that motel's front desk has never been confirmed. The cause of Jolaine's death was drowning. The manner of death was ruled accidental following the 1966 autopsy. Sheriff A.B. Nair did not open a homicide investigation. Chief Lisa Tarango later said there was no evidence proving Jolaine had been murdered, though she considered aspects of the case suspicious. Several of Jolaine's family members have said, separately, that they believe her death involved foul play. Both have been said by people with direct knowledge of the case. This film treats them as 2 separate things, because the evidence does not allow them to be merged into one. For 55 years, a family in Kansas carried the absence of a daughter they could not locate. For the same 55 years, a town in Texas carried the memory of a girl they could not name. 800 miles apart, and separated by a gap in the records no one in 1966 had the means to close. It took an anonymous tip, investigators willing to look again, and forensic work spanning 3 states, to let those 2 histories finally recognize each other. That work gave Jolaine Hemmy back her name. It let a family bury their sister where she belonged. It let a town finally know who they had been caring for, all along. It did not tell anyone what happened in the 4 days before she died, or who the man beside her was, or why he left. A name can return a person to their family. It cannot always return the truth of how they were lost. This is Forgotten Evidence, Buried Truths.